Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, colleagues, so I'm really happy to bid you welcome this morning to our Tuesday session of our conference on ancient empires and modern empires and phenomena of translatio and renovatio. As you see, we are slowly leaving the purely Greco-Roman space and are now entering into some comparative considerations also in this morning's program, and thus it is my pleasure to also to introduce you to Loïc Bourgy, this morning's speaker. Loïc, who is my PhD student, can say my most brilliant student I've ever had until now. He did his master thesis with me at the University of Brussels from 2013 to 2015, I think. Worked a lot with me also on the journal Latomus at that moment, and he published his master thesis 1 year later in 2016, if I remember correctly, as a monograph. And already his master thesis was quite a thick book of what was 300, 400, 500 pages, a master thesis which could have been finally also be considered even as a PhD. So really a brilliant work on the establishment of the Augustan ideology in the context of the propagandistic conflict between Mark Antony and Augustus. And so we decided on opening the horizon through his PhD by opening up this subject to the Chinese ancient history. And so Loïc also set out and started learning Chinese so that he could be able also to work with the source material and to have an inside feeling about the functioning, of course, of the Chinese language, the Chinese mind, the Chinese philosophy. And so he spent even some time at Beijing in order to be capable to write this comparative thesis. And so we we will have today an extract or some form of synthesis of his thesis in the comparison between the imperial ideologies of Augustus and of the Qin and early Han dynasty through one specific aspect, that is comparing these tokens or guarants or symbolic and religious guarants of power in both cultural spheres, the pignora imperii of Rome and the 9 cauldrons. So we are really looking forward to this essay in imperial, let's say, mechanics and comparisons. So the floor is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David, for your presentation of myself. And I'm very glad to be here and present a little part of my future PhD thesis. My voice is quite broken, so I hope that my voice will not vanish like the old Roman Republic in the process. So today we will talk about the historical comparison between Rome and China in order to offer a more precise picture of the main themes of the imperial ideology. And in both historical cases, transmission, translatio of imperial power and renewal, renovatio of imperial power are outstanding features of this kind of political ideology. And today I will try not to focus too much on pure and mere academical concern for the ancient history and try to offer some keys to understand more clearly what an imperial ideology is, notably for the colleagues that are working on more recent periods of history. So the topic is so broad that I have decided to pay attention to one precise aspect of this ideology. In order to do so, I propose a selection of the main sources, but be aware that there are a huge number of secondary passages and sources that throw a brighter light on the topic. More precisely, I will focus my presentation on the Roman tradition of pignora imperii and on the interest of comparing that with ancient China. The pignora imperii are the sacred tokens or pledges of the Roman rule, and this set of objects acting like protective talisman of Rome could be understood as the guarantee of the durability of the Roman rule on the long term, is the symbol of Roma Aeternitas. But as we shall see, their function, the function of pignora imperii, and the meaning will gradually evolve when the empire was founded by Augustus, and I will try to catch the changing of that function and meaning under Augustus. And if I use the Latin pignora imperies only for the sake of commodity, obviously. So my main research interests are, is there existing something similar in ancient China? Because the comparison is always based on similarities, and the comparison helps us to see what the difference is here. So what the comparison with ancient China could bring, that approach could bring something new that a non-comparative research do. So what are the purposes of comparison for both historical contexts? And one answer to that question is offer a theoretical framework to understand what imperial ideology is and how the imperial ideology is formed, and what are the process of formation of a shared imperial identity. And in that point of view, China and Rome offer the more emblematic historical examples at the both ends of the Eurasia continent. So let's get started with my chronological framework. First, I briefly show you that chronological framework. And this is a sequence of evolution of civilization or historical culture. And that framework has been selected on the basis of previous researchers on the same topic and on the basis of striking similarities in the historical evolution towards an empire in both historical culture. So I have quoted some historical comparatives, for example, Spengler, and the colloquium is organized in some way by the Spengler Society, so I can restrain me to make some allusion to the Spenglerian spirit. So Spengler identified a battling society of nation that lead to a Kaiserian state, and other comparatists used different words, but to design and to mean the same things: an age of conflict and a stage of universal empire for Carol Quigley, which is an American comparatist. And maybe if we consider the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we are maybe on the verge of the age of conflict identified by Quigley, but it is only a perspective. And David Spengler, excuse me, David, for this lapsus. David Engels talk about the construction of the norm and a reconstruction of the standard, the two phases of historical evolution. So let's talk that two stages are visible. We can identify them in both historical culture. For China is the Ring State period, and for Rome is the end of the Roman Republic. We have a first stage of imperial unification. It was a revolutionary, quite revolutionary state with a radical change. And then we have again wars, and after that wars, we have a second imperial unification, which is more conservative. So let's talk about a little bit about Spengler. And yesterday I have tried to find passages which could fit for my subject. So I think that passages is really interesting. And I will try to challenge the view of Spengler that the ideology is not so important. What is important in the succession of fact that leads to a new form of state. And my point is that ideology is related to the reality in a dialectical way, and we can understand more clearly that passages to a state, to an empire, if we focus also on some main themes of an imperial ideology, but I will briefly show you the geographical framework for only China, because for Rome, you know that very well, all of us, I think. So for China, we have a different um, system of independent states, and they are the Waring state period. And what state that are called by Spengler as the Kaiserian Chinese state is the state of Qin, which is quite peripheral to other Waring states. And Carol Kingley showed that the empire is usually founded by a peripheral state vis-à-vis the toward in difference, in comparison, in contrast with the main original cultures. So the empire state is founded by a more peripheral one, and Carol Kigley state is that a kind of regularity across history. So let's talk about the main themes of my theoretical framework. I briefly show you the core of my theoretical framework. I identify four main themes of an imperial ideology, and I deal with the tradition of pignora imperii in the theme of the worldwide rule myth, which is the second one. And what I show you is that from Rome, the pignora imperii is more related to the aeternitas, or eternity, and the long-lasting rule of Rome. And then when Augustus founded the empire, that pignora imperii will be more related to universalist conception, and that four main themes are correlated to each other, and they formed a system, an ideological system, which is very long-lasting in the history of that different empires. And that system is featured, is characterized by enormous flexibility, like we saw in mythography or in historiography. And I think it's a tool for a trans-historical analysis of all the empires across history and beyond geographical borders. And that four main themes can help to create an imperial identity and an imperial culture, a shared imperial culture, in order to unify different people into a new grand narrative of history. So I will skip this dia, but I can go back to it during the question session, because I prefer indeed to show you in the process how the comparison does work, but I can explain in a theoretical point of view. So let's talk about the pignora imperii and the Roman case. We have a late source that enumerates a list of these sacred objects, but only two, in fact, appear as truly authentic. At the end of the Roman Republic is the Palladium, and I will discuss in more details the Palladium and the Ankylia. The other objects listed here by Servius, it's a late commentator of Aeneid and Virgil. This list seems to me quite related to more late period than the end of the Roman Republic, and I try to find some proof of that. And if we compare that list with another one, for example, in the Historia Augusta, in the life of Heliogabalus, which is a quite completely mad emperor in the 3rd century AD. So we have the Matris Typus or the Vestae Ignis, and the Vestae Ignis is completely absent, is lacking for the first list. So my point is that the tradition of pignora imperii is not a fixed one, is involving constantly during the process of formation empire and the succession of different emperors. And for example, Virgil insists so much on the depenates of Troy, and we don't retrieve them here in that list. And there are also uncertainties about this list because, for example, in the Historia Augusta, we have omnia Romanis veneranda, all the things that are venerated by the Romans. So it's a tradition that is constantly evolving in my point of view. So, without contest, the Palladium is the more important one. It is a wood statuette of Athena's palace, preserved in Troy. Following the tradition, as long as the Trojans possessed the Palladium, the city would be safe. Ulysses or Diomedes, you can see on the precious gemstone preserved in Oxford, would have seized the Palladium in order to facilitate the siege and precipitate the fall of Troy. Following another version, the Palladium would have been preserved by Aeneas and brought to Rome. In fact, the Romans themselves didn't know exactly under what circumstances the Palladium had arrived in their own city, and other cities than Rome in Mediterranean basin have claimed to possess the Palladium. So the oldest historical fact we have about the Palladium is when Lucius Caecilius Metellus was Pontifex Maximus in the second half of the 3rd century BC. A fire destroyed the temple of Vesta, inside which the fire of Vesta is burning constantly in the symbol of the Roman Trinitas. So the Pontifex threw himself amidst the flames to save the Palladium. Injured, he lost the sight, and it became a kind of example of Roman virtue. At the end of the Roman Republic, Aeneas is considered by the gens Julia. It is the founder of the empire because Caesar belongs to that gens, and Augustus too by his mother. So as his prestigious ancestor, they consider Aeneas as their prestigious ancestor, and thanks to this mythical hero, the gens Julia is related to Venus, and Caesar dedicated a temple to Venus Genitrix, so the mother of their family. So Caesar had particularly developed this link, this genealogical link, and we have coins to demonstrate that also. And Augustus will develop later also this genealogical link, but by distancing quite himself to Caesar. So the Aeneid of Virgil gave to the Romans people and to the Romans a national epic. This tradition that linked Rome to the mythical Trojan and Greek world in some way helped the Roman to claim a more prestigious past and more prestigious origins. So it is a outstanding case of translation, and the move of the Palladium from Troy to Rome materialized this claim, and the Palladium is considered to be preserved in the Temple of Vesta. You can see just here on Forum Romanum in Rome, alongside with other precious objects, and in the direct proximity of the fire of Vesta. So I quote also a passage of Ovid, and we can clearly see the uncertainty of the Romans themselves about their own tradition. But one thing is sure is that the res est Roma. So the thing is Roman, and there are no question about that. And the Romans are so powerful that they can impose their own vision of the mythical past, and beyond the word auctor, we have also a clue to see Augustus behind that word. So under Augustus, there is a changing of the ideology about the Palladium, but it's not so much related to Palladium than to the Temple of Vesta. So the Palladium is involved with the Temple of Vesta to more universal consideration. And we can see that function in that passage. Ovid made a striking comparison between the Temple of Vesta and the earth. He goes even further. He assimilates the earth and the Temple of Vesta. He also talks about a planetarium made in Syracuse, and it seems that his globus was the one placed in the Temple of Virtus, about which Cicero talked about too. And we can also think to the Pantheon of Adrian inside, which a perfect sphere could be placed in the space between the ground and the top. So this is maybe a previous idea about how to show a universal view of the Roman Empire through a building. So during the following centuries, the Palladium was still considered as a Pignus imperii and was apparently transferred to Constantinople by Constantine the Great during the 4th century. So this translation, true or false, could be considered as a strategy to legitimize the new capital. And the function of the Palladium was therefore moved in a Christian context and gave an example of the transmission of some part of the Roman imperial ideology to the Christian world of the Middle Ages. So let's talk about the ancient China now. So I searched for an equivalent in the ancient China history, and the answer is the 9 Cauldrons, the Zhou things, forged by Yu the Great, according to the tradition. And the metal would have been brought by the 9 provinces, and these 9 provinces form the Chinese world. And that 9 cauldrons represented in some way the domination over the Chinese base. So the biggest difference with the Roman case is that the 9 cauldrons from the start are linked with the universal domination over the Chinese space. So Yu the Great is indeed the mythical emperor founder of the Xia dynasty, which is a legendary dynasty so far. And he organized all the Chinese space. And in the text, we can see that the universal organization of the whole Chinese universe is maybe rewritten at the light of the later imperial unification under Qin Huangdi or the Han dynasty. Yu the Great is also considered as the one who stopped the Chinese Great Flood, and that the one who organized the world territory and fixed that civilization in administrative ways. So during the foundation of the Zhou dynasty and between Yu the Great, which is a mythical emperor, is founded the Xia dynasty, then we have the Shang, and then we have the Zhou. And it is under the Zhou that we have a striking apparition of that 9 cauldrons in the national trade or the royal treasure of the Shang dynasty, alongside with precious jewels with a protective function. They are quite talisman of the royal power. So in my point is that the Zhou thing is maybe a creation of the Zhou, and that projected that creation of the 9 cauldron into a more remote past in order to legitimize that cauldrons. And also during that foundation of the Zhou dynasty, we have also a phenomenon of renovatio, because in the second quoting here, we have Tianxia Gongshe. It means a new beginning for the whole Chinese universe. It's a new start. And then we have the seizing of the 9 cauldrons related to a universal domination and to a new start in the succession of the dynasty, because we have the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou. And then we have the Qin dynasty. But before talking about the Qin and the Han, we have also a different function of the tripods, and the tripod enrich themselves with different function throughout the time. So they were associated to other sacred objects with a talismanic power. They are associated to a worldwide domination, to a related to divination and to the durability of power. They are related to good government and to a virtuous government. For example, the tripods are so heavy that no one could move them because it's a symbol of the virtuous rule. And they are also related to the automatic production of food, which is a key feature of other myth of renovatio, like the Golden Age, for example. So under the Qin dynasty, they have a discrepancy among the sources. First, we have the statement that Qin seized the cauldron and founded the Universal Empire. And then under the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, we have a vain attempt to retrieve the cauldron, one or some of the whole cauldrons that had been lost in the Si River. And so the first emperor tried to retrieve that lost cauldron, but he failed to do that. And it is a story related by the Han, the another dynasty. And so between the end of the reigning state and the Han dynasty, the cauldron lost in importance. But the memory remains completely alive. Under 2 Han Emperor, Emperor Wen and Emperor Han Wuti, the fact that one or some cauldron seems to have been lost in the Si River at the end of the reigning state period and during the imperial unification process under the Qin dynasty is instrumentalized to legitimate the power of the emperor. And under Han Wuti, the rediscovery or the discovery of the lost bronze tripod is presented as an auspicious omen of his legitimacy as the son of heaven. And this even is related to great sacrifices to cosmic entities. I will not develop that point because they lead us too far. The same event is related to the imperial progress of the emperor that visit the territories, and during that visit, the people renew the infrastructure, the roads and the building for the passage of the imperies. Another illustration of the renovation of the uh, um, Chinese base. And so in that two passages, we have striking evidence that the apparition of that cauldron is a forgery by the counselor of the emperor, and the emperor used that forgery to legitimize themselves. So it is a pure phenomenon of creation of a pignora imperii based on the previous tradition. I will just skip this data because the time is quite short. And then what could bring that comparison with Roman context? That comparison leads me to search for other Roman objects during the empire foundation. And so I have tried to find other objects. The most obvious one is the sacred fire of Vesta. Another example, the Sibylline books, and another purely conjectural example is the maybe tripod of Apollo in the Palatine temples. But the most obvious one for me is maybe the eagles of the Roman legion, the Aquila. So the eagles of the Roman legion gain in symbolical and ideological importance throughout the end of the Roman Republic. And I presented here only one example of the importance of Aquila during the early career of Octavian during the Turian period. The Aquila is the most sacred military standard of Rome, and until the climax is reached under Augustus, when the eagles and military standard lost by the Roman armies and captured by the Persians are recovered by him. And this recovering of the lost eagles, instrumentalized like the recovering of the lost cauldron by Han Wudi, is presented as an auspicious omen and the realization of a prophecy and a symbol of a cosmic and universal rule, and that recovering is presented as the fact that Rome has reached a universal domination and a cosmic one. So we must also search for other sacred objects in China. We are back to China now, during the empire unification under the Qin and Han dynasty. And in fact, it seems that the effort of the Qin dynasty have been focused on the creation of new objects that symbolize the universal rule written down on the capture or recovering of the supposedly lost cauldron. Qin elaborated, for example, 12 giant metal colossi with the weapons confiscated throughout the empire. So we have the combination here of a universal peace, a demilitarization of the empire space, and then the claim to have reached a universal domination that are the main themes of imperial ideology. I don't have time enough to fully develop, but my hypothesis is that this statue must be analyzed as the representation of the vanquished warring state rather than the representation of the barbarians. And in fact, his second interpretation is the one that are circulating under the Han, but probably not under the Qin. So the Qin dynasty also created, not from scratch, but from a precious jade stone called reshaped, the imperial seal of succession that will be officially transmitted to Liu Bang, the founder of the new Han dynasty during the collapse of the Qin dynasty and the turmoil of the Shu Han contention, the final wars before the imperial unification under the Han. And then the seal of imperial succession will be transmitted from emperor to emperor as the sign of the imperial power across time and generation. And traditionally, we opposed too quickly the Qin and the Han dynasty, but this seal is the striking example that show that there exist ways of continuity and transmission between the Qin and the Han. It is a striking example of translatio imperii. And that comparison reminds me that an attempt had been made to consider the seal ring of Augustus like an object of that same function, but the research is still going, I think, on that subject. There are publication of Simpson, but I will skip that point, and in the question I can develop that. So we have also another example is the creation of the sword of Liu Bang, the first founder of the Han Dynasty. I will skip that point, and I can go back to it during the question session, but it is also a nice example of the creation of a kind of pignus imperii, and that word is related in some way to cyclical theory of the dynastic succession. So what? And I have sketched the possible purpose here and aims of the historical comparison. I didn't have time enough to fully develop in a historical point of view, but my point is that that historical comparison can bring some key to the understanding of the imperial ideology in general. So my first point is that a fruitful historical comparisons needs to be related to a theory, maybe a theory of the historical evolution or to a theoretical framework. And in my case, the theoretical framework is the four main themes of an imperial ideology. I think that main themes of an imperial ideology does work also for more recent period than ancient history. So for the pre-modern empire, that four main themes are really relevant in my point of view. And a second purpose of the comparison is a heuristical one, so to find new questions to answer and to find new answer to that new questions and deepen the understanding of both historical contexts. The comparison help us also to build a theoretical model by the phenomena of reasoning by induction. So I will reach right now my conclusion, and I think I am in the time. Maybe? Okay. So that's my conclusion. We have a downward movement and an upward movement between the ideology and the reality. And my main point is that the sacred and talismanic objects are situated and located at the core of a nexus between the translation and translatio, transmission, and recreation, renovatio phenomena. And we have so an upward downward movement between idealization of the reality and the mythologization of the present. So that's my conclusion, and I really warmly thank you all for your attention.